In the first decades of the 16th century, a single man quietly bent the map of Europe. He was not crowned. He commanded no armies. He wrote no scripture. He kept ledgers. His name was Jakob Fugger, merchant, miner, lender, strategist. At the height of his rise, his fortune hovered around 2% of Europe's total output, the rough equivalent of $400 billion today. With that kind of leverage, a person might have healed cities and ended hunger. Fugger chose something colder. His signature move was simple and devastating. He would advance cash to desperate rulers, but insist on metal-barred copper or bright silver as collateral. If they failed, he already held the value. In modern language, that is secured, asset-backed lending. From that wedge, he built a continental metals empire, smelters in Austria, concessions in Tyrol, veins in the Alps, copper pits across Hungary and Slovakia. Shipments left his warehouses like clockwork. Prices across trading towns tilted when his agents. By the way, if you love money, subscribe to the channel and give it a like. Now, let's continue. Then he aimed at ideas. For centuries, the church had thundered that interest usury was a sin. Lending was permissible. Profit on a loan endangered the soul. Fugger insisted that risk, time, and labor deserved payment. He paid scholars to argue, sponsored disputations, and petitioned Rome. Under Pope Leo XI, a narrow door opened. Interest tied to costs and risk would not stain a conscience. The letter of doctrine shifted. The bloodstream of commerce quickened. He also poured money into indulgences. Bishops and friars fanned out selling printed slips that promised relief from purgatory, the proceeds ostensibly bound for sacred projects. In practice, the coin split two ways, toward Rome's building plans and toward the bankers who fronted the cash. Fugger's factors counted, guarded, and advanced against future collections. Those revenues helped raise St. Peter's and keep Michelangelo on scaffolding, and they set tinder for a monk from Wittenberg to strike. How did a cloth dealer's son learn to pull so many strings? Jakob was born in 1459 in bustling Augsburg. His father died when the boy was 10, and his mother sent him to Venice to apprentice. There he absorbed double entry, bills of exchange, maritime insurance, and the art of soft power, how favors, rumors, and couriers travel. Back home, he watched Emperor Frederick III lean on the Fugger firm for silk and credit. A coat of arms with 3 lilies marked the family's ascent. Lesson absorbed. Crowns need sea. A technological wave helped. Between 1480 and 1560, new pumps, blast furnaces, and tunneling techniques made deeper mining possible as demand for metal exploded. Jakob pivoted from textiles to ore. In 1485, he took charge of the Innsbruck Agency, the hinge to Tyrol's mines. Archduke Sigismund owned the shafts, but not solvency. Pomp and mismanagement had bled his coffers. Fugger offered loans secured not by hazy promises, but by shipments of metal. If the court defaulted, the ore already sitting in his yards. Scale followed. By the 1490s, the Fuggers effectively managed Europe's largest metals combine. When Sigismund faded, Maximilian of Austria surged. Maximilian Frederick's ambitious son needed huge sums to secure elections, dowries, and campaigns. Fugger extended stupendous credit and 800,000 florin facility, among them, taking lands, monopolies, and revenue streams as surety. With that finance, Maximilian took cities, paid troops, and positioned himself to wear imperial titles. The banker gained power-bred curious virtues. City councils periodically tried to expel Jewish communities. Imperial protection, often encouraged by Fugger's interests and relationships, blunted those drives. Pragmatism and conscience overlapped. Skilled capital stayed inside the borders, and the throne kept a steadier tax base. Meanwhile, grain loans, armory contracts, and tax farms stitched crown and counting house into one machine. The church became the grandest stage. In 1514, the Archbishopric of Mainz opened second only to the emperor in German clout. Albrecht of Brandenburg wanted the mitre, but lacked the price of admission. Pope Leo X, a patron and a spendthrift, expected heavy fees. Fugger engineered the transfer. Tens of thousands of florins moved to papal accounts. To service the debt, Albrecht unleashed a sweeping indulgence campaign. Johann Tetzel, part preacher, part showman, toured with iron-bound chests and a price table. Enter Martin Luther. A miner's son from the Harz, he knew the smell of smelting and the reach of merchant credit. In 1517, he posted theses against indulgences. In 1518, under Roman orders, he was examined in Augsburg in a hall owned by the Fuggers. He left unbent. Pamphlets exploded across the press network, and the protests thickened into the Reformation. Princes chose sides, cities split, and decades later, religious wars would scour fields and starve towns. Fugger did not live to see the 30 Years' W. Meanwhile, Rome leaned harder on bankers. Popes needed architects, soldiers, and coin. Fugger provided cash and, at times, muscle. Swiss mercenaries became a permanent guard. His firm even leased the papal mint, the Zecca striking dozens of coin types for successive pontiffs. Coins carry sovereignty in their faces. Entrusting the press to Augsburg meant trusting its discipline. A separate scandal nearly broke the house when a prince-bishop's secret investment in Fugger ventures surfaced and rivals demanded. Enemies multiplied. Broadsheets cast the Fuggers as velvet-clad devils, blamed them for monopolies and price rises, and painted their audit halls as factories of oppression. Yet the market order they embodied kept spreading. Trade widened, credit deepened. A later scholar, Max Weber, would argue that Protestant ethics lubricated the spirit of capitalism. Irony piled on irony. A revolt against indulgences ended up supercharging instruments that would define modern finance. For all his cold calculus, Fugger built one of Europe's oldest social housing projects, the Fuggerei in Augsburg, a walled neighborhood for working poor who paid a token annual rent and offered daily prayers for their benefactors. The endowment sat on a 5% return, carefully structured under accepted doctrine. In a life organized by risk management, he left a line for mercy and memory. He died on December 30th, 1525. His company's assets totaled roughly 2 million guilders, astonishing for the age. His nephew Anton carried the empire forward, extending trade from Iberia to the Baltic, advising Bavarian dukes, sponsoring Jesuit schools, and buying over 100 villages in Swabia. Merchants became nobles. Factors became councillors. The family's crest replaced a warehouse mark on stone lintels. What then is the verdict? Fugger armed kings, paid popes, normalized collateral, and scaled mining into a continental industry. He underwrote art that still lifts eyes and deals that hastened a schism. He defended some minorities, squeezed many debtors, and navigated gray zones where legality, necessity, and conscience wrestled. He proved that financial plumbing credit, collateral, cash flow, could reorder borders and doctrines. There is a modern rhyme. Give one financier the lever over rare earth mines, a dominant payments rail, and a political advertising exchange, and watch policy bend. That is how princes felt when dispatches from Augsburg arrived. Dependence dressed as opportunity. Markets are not neutral. They are machines wired by people with aims. Without guardrails, power concentrates, backlash follows, and the cost is often paid in grain and blood. Still, his imprint is stubborn. The Fuggerei still shelters families. Cathedrals he bankrolled still gleam. Techniques he normalized secured lending, integrated supply chains, syndicated campaigns, information advantages remain standard. Strip away the brocade and banners, and you can see him at his desk. A courier by the stove, a factor reporting a flooded shaft, a royal messenger with seals. He listens, asks 3 questions, and decides. Extend here, call collateral there, float a bill through the fair. He was not a saint, not a cartoon villain. He was a builder of leverage. In a world of slow law and slower armies, he understood that speed belonged to anyone who could move promises safely. He wrapped promises in metal when possible, in paper when necessary, and in favors when nothing else worked. He left cathedrals and neighborhoods and precedents. He also left a temper for monopoly that stoked resentment. Judge him in full. To feel how radical his collateral model was, remember the norms of late medieval credit. Loans were personal vows sweetened by piety. A prince pledged future taxes, a bishop pledged tithes, a city pledged tolls. Collection was slow, records were uneven, revolt could erase revenues overnight. Fugger replaced vows with things: ingots, ore carts, future deliveries locked by charter. He diversified risk across pits and principalities. He wrote clauses that forced extra shipments when prices fell and let him. He paired that with better information. Agents wrote weekly letters from Antwerp, Venice, and Nuremberg. Couriers carried price lists. Factors compared fares. Brokers tracked ship arrivals and mountain weather. With better data, he cut losses fast and demanded margin in the modern sense. More metal when prices swung. By bills of exchange, he moved value without chests. clearing paper through fairs. The empire ran as much on ink as on ore. Even the indulgence engine looked like a franchise. Local preachers marketed the message, printers supplied forms, auditors tallied, riders carried proceeds to depots, shares split, Rome, lender, expenses. The more districts that joined, the cheaper the cash became for the borrower and the more profit for the syndicate, until a monk with a hammer turned it from marvel to scandal. Luther's protest hit nerves because ordinary people lived at the seam of debt and devotion. Miners owed rent to lords and credit to merchants. Peasants owed tithes and taxes. Towns owed annuities to financiers. A promise that coin could buy spiritual relief sounded like one more extraction layered on winter hunger. Luther attacked the theology. Crowds felt the economics. The same presses that printed indulgence forms now shot out broadsides. Finance had paved the channels for dissent. The mint lease revealed another gear. Good coin breeds trust. Bad coin breeds riots. By leasing the Zecca, the Fugger house paid for metal, dyes, guards, and presses, and kept a slice of seigniorage, the spread between metal and face. It suited Rome to outsource discipline, and suited Augsburg to stamp it into millions of small sermons in silver and gold. Crises still came. When the prince-bishop's hidden investment surfaced, litigants threatened seizure. Fugger turned to leverage, provisions for imperial wars, freight credit for allies, cash on demand for the curia, if the settlement preserved his solvency. It did. He had learned the oldest rule. Design your rescue so that others want it more than you do. Stand for a moment in that Augsburg office. Ledgers within reach. A map pricked with threads. The smell of wax and wet wool. Decisions sequenced like drum beats. Lend, secure, extract, appease, build, pray. The choreography looks simple because he practiced it daily. So, yes, Jakob Fugger did not just count coins. He edited the script others read from. Kings borrowed his handwriting. Popes borrowed his breath. Long before central banks, he demonstrated that finance can be a constitution, the quiet architecture of power that holds up a world until cracks show. When that architecture serves only the few, reformers pound on church doors. When it serves many, cities bloom. He lived where those forces meet and forced the meeting. If this saga woke a thought, share it, argue with it, and keep an eye on the next builder who claims only to balance books. Money is never only money. It is vote and veto, rescue and threat, the ink that writes treaties and the solvent that erases them. The forms change. The leverage abides. Consider the election that followed Maximilian's death. The princes would choose the next ruler of the Holy Roman Empire, and candidates courted them with both promises and cash. The young Habsburg Charles needed more than noble blood. He needed liquidity. Augsburg obliged. Funds raced through intermediaries to influential electors. Obligations were written that would yield customs, mines, and monopolies. Charles V won the crown in 1519. The moral is plain. Ballots counted, but bank drafts decided that mining itself became a school of systems thinking. In the Tyrol town of Schwaz, thousands worked in shifts under candlelight, hauling ore to surface roads that led toward furnaces and hammer mills. Timber had to be bought, watercourses diverted, bellows repaired, wagons scheduled, smelter chemistry tuned. A house that financed all of this could squeeze cost curves and predict supply far better than rivals. That informational edge knowing when spring floods would slow wagon trains, or when a new gallery, whoa. Partnerships were crucial too. In the East, the Fuggers joined with the Thurzo family in an enterprise often dubbed the Hungarian trade, locking up copper from Upper Hungary and selling into markets from Danzig to Lisbon. Contracts specified delivery windows, quality, and penalties. Arbitrations were planned, and warehouses in key ports turned metal into a liquid, almost monetary asset. When prices dipped in one city, shipments could be rerouted to another. Coordination. More than mere capital was the ad. From these foundations flowed instruments that feel modern. Forward contracts scheduled deliveries months out. Receivables were pooled. Risks were tranched among partners, and information moved in newsletters. Hand-copied reports on prices, politics, health of rulers, and weather. When a king fell ill, war risk rose. When snow closed a pass, delivery risk spiked. Credit limits adjusted accordingly. The machinery of finance learned to breathe with the world rather than pretend it was inert. The social backlash was equally complex. Pamphleteers alleged that monopolies strangled small traders and that tax farms turned civic life into endless extraction. City diets debated price caps and coinage reforms. Preachers thundered against greed, and crowds occasionally wrecked the houses of hated officials. Yet, even the angriest towns still needed shipments of grain in bad harvests, salt for preservation, and cash to pay militias. They came to the same counting houses they cursed. That dependence is Fugger's piety was not mere display. Masses were endowed, chapels restored, hospitals supplied. The Fuggerei's rules balanced dignity with discipline. Tenants had to practice a trade, keep the peace, and say set prayers. In return, they received clean dwellings, wells, and a parish life that did not brand them charity cases. The project has outlived empires precisely because it bound spiritual motives to practical governance. Not every bet paid. Mines flooded, caravans were robbed, kings defaulted, and whole regions were thrown by plague. But diversification and collateral kept catastrophe from becoming ruin. When losses hit, the house cut credit to weaker courts and tightened terms for others. The reputation for relentlessness, cold, methodical, was part of the strategy. Mercy was reserved for institutions that mattered to the long game. Understand the political equilibrium that resulted. Rulers who relied on merchant credit tolerated some merchant privilege. Merchants who profited from rulers tolerated some royal waste. Reformers occasionally broke that compact for good reason, by demanding transparency, lawful taxation, and restraint. Modern states would later build bureaucracies to replace private empires like Fugger's with public finance. But in the hinge century before that happened, the private solution filled the vacuum. If you want a useful mental model, imagine an hourglass. At the top sit monarchs, bishops, and city councils. At the bottom sit miners, peasants, artisans, and sailors. In the waist stands a handful of firms that convert promises into payments and materials into money. Everything passes their pinch point. That is why their ledgers look like fate. By the end of his life, the system he helped forge had a distinct rhythm. Mining camps fed smelters. Smelters fed mints and markets. Markets fed treasuries. Treasuries fed armies and artists. And armies and artists fed legitimacy, which fed more borrowing. When something jammed, a war gone long, a harvest failed, a doctrine challenged, shock rippled through the chain. A man who understood where to apply pressure could avert collapse or profit from it. Fugger did both. The final paradox is the clearest. A banker helped the church justify interest, financed the sale of indulgences, and underwrote defenses for the papacy. Those same flows outraged a monk who helped fracture the church and, in the long arc, legitimized modern commerce. The forces clashed and fused, burned and built. What remains are buildings of stone, habits of credit, and a caution. When private leverage becomes public destiny, the bill comes due some. He did not just add wealth, he taught power to keep accounts. If you made it this far, drop a plus in the comments your badge for finishing the deep dive. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more long-form stories where money, history, and power collide. Curious about earlier empires of capital? Check out our Others video.